In the connection of the webinar series, today we have the Professor Raghuveer Singh Sir, Vice Chancellor Tirthankar Mahavir University. And in the connection of the research webinar, today is the topic of the how to publish research paper in quality journal. So now I request you, sir, Honorable Vice Chancellor of Tirthankar Mahavir University, Professor Raghuveer Singh Sir, please enlighten to us and enlighten to participants and the research scholars, students, and the faculty member on today's webinar topic. So now I over to you, sir. Please enlighten to us, please. And on
Thank
behalf
you.
of the Power University, we welcome you, sir. We welcome you. Sir.
Thank you, Dr. Ramesh Rao. It's a pleasure to be
Sir.
again
Welcome,
here.
sir. Welcome.
Good afternoon, everyone. Let's take up further to what we discussed yesterday, how to write a good research paper. Today, we'll take up how to publish the research paper in a quality journal. Now, let's look at what we mean by quality journal. For our reference, quality journal is one which is indexed in recognized indexation services. Now, in India, NAC and NRF, especially in relation to universities, these two bodies have recognized 4 indexation services: Scopus, Web of Science, PubMed, and ICI, that is Indian Citation Services. These are the 4. It is considered to have all those journals which are there in these services considered to be quality journals, at least for this purpose. Okay. Then there are other ways of, assigning quality marks in terms of impact factors, but as of now, we aren't going to consider that, because for any writer, if I'm a publisher, for me it's good enough, or for my university it's good enough to have publication in index services if these are recognized. However, when it comes to NRF and your NAC, the weightage given to these varies. Weightage given to your work published in Scopus is 0.45, so is in Web of Science and PubMed, and weightage given to the work published in ICI is only 0.1. So that you should remember that how important it is to publish in Scopus, Web of Science, and PubMed. So let's look at what are those essential things which we must keep in mind while sending our publication to these journals. That means what are the journals in fact want for accepting your publication. Some of the elements which we would be talking about, let's look at what is a good structure of a research paper, how to select an appropriate journal, how to avoid rejections and enhance acceptance by the journal, and writing a good research paper for publication in index journals, which in fact we discussed yesterday quite a lot. If you look at any good structure of a research paper, these are some of those things which are essential. You got to have an appropriate title. When I say appropriate title, the title, as I discussed yesterday also, the title must always indicate those variables and kind of relationship which you are examining, the relationship. And also the title should appear appealing, a novel title. That means the novelty of the title would come from, of course, the novelty of the work. Any work or any subject or any topic which has been over-researched will not attract the attention from any good journal. That is why I say the novelty of a topic has to be there, and therefore that novelty should also appear in the title of your paper. The title should neither be too long nor too small. It should not be difficult to understand. at first hand. A lot of titles, if you read, it's difficult to even make out what exactly this title would contain. By reading a title, you can make out what could be the contents and what kind of work it would be inside. That is the kind of a simplicity of a title. Then you have abstract, so that a reader could get to know what exactly the work is. That means through an abstract, you should essentially have what is that being investigated. That may be a relationship, or it could be the variable itself. Then, what is the methods which you have used for investigating it? The third is the measure results which you have got in your research. And the fourth part is implications of this particular results. These are the four important things we should put in your abstract. Now, before, in fact, writing the abstract, you should always read the guidelines of a journal, so as to limit your abstract size, or limit your develop your abstract according to the requirements of the journal instructions. Now, there is always a debate. Should you prepare a script and then look for a journal, or first identify a journal, then write a script according to it? There are two ways of doing it. But I would suggest that you first look at the guidelines of a journal. That means first identify the journal for which you want to write. Because each journal has their own specific requirements, and each journal, in fact, deals in specific areas. There are journals which are very discipline specific. There are journals which are, the multidisciplinary nature. There are journals which would accept most of the conceptual paper. There are journals which accept only the experimental work, and so on and so forth. So let's be very, specific about what exactly the demands of a journal are. So the moment you know the demands of a journal, you will be able to adapt your script. Okay. The next one is introduction. Why do you write an introduction? Is because you are trying to tell the reader that how important this particular, work is, and what is the basis of your work, where this work has originated, on what have you built this work on, or what kind of a framework you have used for your work. So that should be brought into the introduction part. Many times you'll find some journals would not differentiate between literature review and introduction. Introduction itself would have a literature review section also. So just look at the instructions of respective journals, whether this is combined or there are two separate topics. Then, of course, you have a literature review. The question is, literature review, how many reviews, what kind of reviews? You definitely should have a sufficient review in order to study the topic in wholesome in that particular discipline. And literature review essentially should include important reviews. That means the most important works of your discipline. It should be there. And so as latest literature review should appear in your review as well. The methods. Many of us have a habit of giving an introduction to the methods which you are used. For example, sampling. People start describing, what is sampling, or what different types of sampling are. These are all passive, not required at all. You say, what methods have you used, and why have you used this? We'll see it later on, all these ways. And then you have analysis and result interpretation. Okay. Do a strong analysis. Look at the analysis from different angles. from different perspective. Don't just have a superficial analysis. That means using one or two analytical methods or using one or two statistical methods. No, go deeper into it. Suppose if you collected the data according to your socioeconomic parameters, then essentially carry out an over test so as to look at the results from different angles. And then, as I discussed yesterday, please have a result discussion. And finally, make a conclusion. A lot of people avoid limitations of their study. No, never ever hide your limitations of the study. And at the same time, don't write too many limitations. Because if you write too many limitations, it will show that the methods used by you in your study are weak. And if you hide limitations, you are trying to say that your study had no limitations, unimaginable, not possible to not to have limitations. So, faithfully highlight what kind of limitations you had. Limitations could be in terms of sample size. Limitations could be in terms of getting the data from the respondents. Limitations could be access to the respondents, etc., etc. And then, of course, show how important this study is to the various groups, that is, implications of the study. This study's implications could be, for example, for the society, for the managers, for the people in general, for different kinds of organizations, for the researchers themselves, that is, for the academia, etc. So try and put at least 4 or 5 groups on which this study relates to, or the group of people who could use the results of your study. And then, of course, you should definitely provide some directions for future study. What kind of directions you should provide in future study is what is that you are not been able to do, because as we discussed, you always have a limited scope of any research work. A research work cannot go into many directions. It cannot have a very wide ramifications. Therefore, you definitely would have left out certain aspects. Those aspects you can definitely recommend for future directions. And this future directions could readily be, the topic for somebody in the future work. Of course, if you have a lot of technical details to be shared in your work, that you should put into appendices. If there are so many tables and data and many other information which support your research, rather than putting in the text of the work, put them at appendices, so that anyone who's interested in the details of your data and methods can go into those appendices and get to have a depth understanding of your work. And finally, the references. Anything and everything which you have reviewed must appear in references. Okay. Next, how to select an appropriate journal. As I discussed, would you prepare the manuscript first or identify the journal? I think we should match our research to the journal requirements. Match our theme of the research to the journal requirement. Otherwise, your script will immediately be rejected if your theme of the research does not match the journal requirements. Let's look at the aims and scopes of the journal. That is, what specific field or journal field or interdisciplinary field a journal deals with. Find the visibility of the journal. How do you find the visibility? Whether the journal is indexed or not. If the journal is not indexed, it will not have a sufficient visibility. And if it doesn't have the visibility, then your work will never receive any citations. So assure that your work which you are trying to publish goes to the index journals. So if it is indexed, then which indexation services, like, I discussed the important ones earlier, Scopus, Web of Science, PubMed, ICI, etc. And even UGC listed, if you ask, someone who is a beginner in writing research work, you didn't have much of experience, you can start with the UGC listed. That's the minimum I would recommend. Okay. And if someone who's a really hesitant, a lot of us have a hesitancy to start with. So even you can begin with the non-indexed. It doesn't matter. Couple of papers which have been published in non-indexed journals would give you a lot of encouragement, will give you a lot of confidence to move to the next level. Contrary to that, some of us have that habit of saying, no, if I produce my work, it will go into the best of the journals. I think that's the wrong approach, because unless you send your manuscript for journals, you won't in fact get a feedback. And definitely I would recommend always I'll recommend that whenever you send your script, always see that the journal has at least peer reviewing. Means your work is reviewed and the feedback is sent to you, because that will get you immense knowledge. It's always recommended that you read the guidelines of the journal in detail. Specific requirements, maybe say in terms of total size of your journal. It could be in terms of words, number of words, say 6,500 words. Now, if your words comes out to be 6,700, you will always have a problem. They would reject it. So see that guidelines are matched. The font which they talk about, this spacing they talk about, all these things are very rudimentary in nature, but the journals are very particular about it. If it doesn't match, they would send your script back. Also see, is it available online? Because any journal available online would also enhance your visibility. So you have double advantage. If it is indexed, it comes into a print form, and if it is also online, you get a better visibility. Then look at the journal's turnaround time and frequency of publication. Why should you look at these two things, turnaround time and frequency of publication? Because of two simple reasons. Number one, the faster the turnaround, there are better chances for you to get a quick feedback. And if it is accepted, well, you are happy about it. If it is not accepted, you get immediate feedback and then you can send to the next journal. And if the frequency of publications are more, then you have a chances of publication of your work in that specific journal much higher than if the frequency is once in a year or twice in a year. So you get a higher probability of getting your work published if the frequency of publication of any given journal is higher. Then look at, is the journal included in bibliographic and subject-specific databases? Yes, that's great. See, today if you look at whether it is NRF or it is Scopus, they all pick up your publications directly from bibliographic or databases. So through bibliographics, they know your citations, they know your H index as well as university's H index, and through various databases which are ultimately linked to ImpleNet, and from there these two agencies, accreditation as well as ranking agencies, pick up the publication data. They don't seek all those details from you; they will get themselves from there. Are there any publication charges? I recommend that avoid sending your script to all those publication or what you call journals which charge publication, because such publications may not stay longer in a given indexation services. They might charge from you by the time your script is published, you might have that off the record. They might withdraw, that particular journal from that indexation services. And also, I recommend that each one of us, in fact, register ourselves on those databases. Whether it is in a Google Scholar, it is essential for all of us, or a ResearchGate, or any other. I would recommend each one of you register in ResearchGate, if not for anything else, but to strengthen your research methodology. Because when you read through those, chats, you really and immensely get enriched about research methodology. And you can put any types of question about your research methodology or problems related to research. You'll get at least 10 to 12, remarks on your question or different types of answers. So you really get enriched. So therefore, I suggest let's register ourselves on such portals where a lot of interaction and the chatting happens about research, and I see myself, it is immensely beneficial to all of us. So let's register in there. How to enhance acceptability and avoid rejection of the manuscript. You see, there are two types of rejections which you come across. One is desk rejection, and second is peer review rejection. Peer review rejection is three different types: theory building rejection, methods rejection, and analysis rejection. So this section which I'm going to discuss with you is going to be very, very important. So the first thing as a researcher or a writer I should avoid is my desk rejection, because if desk rejection happens, which is generally done by an editorial board, this is the worst thing which can happen to us, because you never get any review report on desk rejection. So your efforts, all that you put into, will not enlighten you about the weaknesses of your paper. And the desk rejection is generally based on mismatch between the scope and aims of journal and the manuscript. I said if scope is about biotechnology, and if we send a publication of physical sciences, well, it is not within the scope of it. If the scope is about conceptual paper, and if you write a paper based upon your experimental design, yes, the scopes don't match. Then the size of manuscript, that is in number of words, as I indicated earlier. If the guidelines of a journal says maximum limit to 6,500 words and minimum to 5,000 words, you cannot exceed that. Even if you have 50 words succeeded, you have to cut short it. Okay. Then no citation of papers of the journal. It's a lot of journals. In fact, they themselves have a competition within, and the competition is for basically enhancing their impact factor. So they would require that, and rather they would emphasize on that all those papers which have been published in their journals in the past, you have cited some of them. Okay, so that means they will see how many papers from that respective journal you have cited in your work. Also, they will also see whether you have cited some important work from the field. In whichever area, if you are writing a paper on physics, they'll like to know, these are the few most important work in the field of physics. Have you cited them or not? The fifth reason could be a poor literature review. Poor literature review could be in terms of number of papers which you have reviewed, or most of your papers are old papers, and most of the papers are local papers. That means, insignificant papers from insignificant journals, and mostly, combining local publishers would be a poor literature review. So they would like to look at, how many papers did you review? What is the quality of those papers which you have reviewed? Did you review the papers, any papers from the journal itself? Did you review the papers which are, very important in the field or not? So before you start writing any, literature, keep these things in your mind. And then there is always a poor language. See, people coming from, non-English speaking areas, maybe Asian, South American or other parts of the world, will always be at a disadvantage in terms of language. However, good language we might boast of ourselves, but they look at it differently. So I suggest that try and to have as a co-author some of the people from American universities or European universities. If you could always get in as a team with them, number one. Number two, try to use a language editor, one who can edit your language. But if you go by the recommendations of the journals, they recommend some of them, but the costs are prohibitive. So I don't recommend such recommended editors of the language. So it'll be good if you could send it at your own level to a colleague of yours who's an English faculty and another colleague. That means if you can have 2 to 3 times review of your paper in terms of language, plus you can subject it to software editors which looks at grammar and spelling, spell checks, etc., etc. I think you would be able to do a much better work than otherwise. Rejection due to poor theory building, that was related to rejection. If you have passed this stage of desk rejection, and by taking care of all these points which I mentioned, about 6 of them, then your work moves to the next peer review. Now, as I mentioned earlier, there are 3-4 things which a peer review guy would look at. The first thing I look at is try to have in your literature review some of the work of the reviewing team highlighted. And if you have good number of publications from that journal already peer reviewed, that takes care. The first rejection could happen because of the poor theory building. No research work can proceed without a good theory building. Theory building will help us to identify a sound research problem, and it builds a theoretical framework for our work. Hence, a strong literature review would give us an in-depth understanding of the problem. So any unclear research problem and positioning of the paper due to inability to present the current state of knowledge of the field. That means, as I earlier discussed, if your literature review is too focused to the old-time 80s and 90s public work, that means the peer review team will conclude that you have no idea of the current state of knowledge in your field. And if you have reviewed only local insignificant work, again they would conclude that you have no idea about this importance of work going on in your field. Therefore, I recommended in my earlier discussion that your review has to be current, most of it, and the important work from your field has to be reviewed. So that would give a good beginning for understanding your problem. See, that also builds a rapport with the reviewer. It influences the reviewer that yes, you begin well. Another reason for rejection could be a limited review of literature presented by you. Very few work of the past has been reviewed by you. Or the literature presented is too old and insignificant, as I mentioned earlier. No reference to the important work in the field. Unable to justify the source of hypothesis. See, the hypothesis comes from the review of literature, the understanding of the current work and the questions which you raise while you are reviewing this work. And if you don't find answers, that is the starting point of your hypothesis. So you will find in the current, style of writing, the research questions, the research objectives and hypothesis, they all are highlighted in the introduction page itself. Unlike in the past where we had one separate section called research methods, where you would in a sequence highlight 1, 2, 3 research questions, and then 1, 2, 3, 4 research objectives, and then followed by your hypothesis, etc. Now that style is old one, but in the current style, in the introduction page itself, you will find a literature review. You will find as you go on doing literature review, you will raise research questions and then research objectives, and followed by your hypothesis. So the hypothesis could be raised as your literature review progresses. Unable to raise research questions through concept building. Raising research questions which has no relevance to the research problem, or which has no relevance to your state of the knowledge in your review. So there is no linkages. Usually, if you look at entire theory building model, your literature review give rise to research questions in your mind. And if you do not have an answer to that question, that becomes the basis of your research question. There you move from the research objectives, research objectives, you move to your research, your problem statement, and then research hypothesis. And there is a perfect link to all of these. And at the end, when you look at your conclusions, every conclusion should essentially answer or meet your research objectives. So there has to be perfect correlation, I must say, not in terms of your research methods or statistical means, but in general, a correlation. That means your conclusions have to meet your research objectives, and research objectives has to raise from research questions, and your hypothesis has to come from research objectives. Okay, so there's a perfect alignment in all these. Now, if you can establish this alignment, you have a strong reason to be accepted. Then you have a poor citation style, probably not following the citation style as it is recommended for a given field, and using a mix of the styles, citation styles. No, you got to use one specific style. If you say, I'm going to use MLA, use that. You're going to use Harvard, use that. You want to use APA, use that APA all throughout. So you should perfectly know how in-text citation is used by APA. Okay. If you are writing a statement of your literature review in direct way, then how APA citation is written. And if you are writing in indirect way, then how citation style is written. That has to be perfected. And then finally it is, if you don't detail the variable or discuss at a literature section, well, then you won't even know what variables are you dealing. So the soul of the research misses. So your variables have to be detailed. Next is avoiding method rejections. Having done this part perfectly, that is theory building. Theory building ends with hypothesis formulation. Hypothesis formulation. So a good theory building would lead to a sound foundation of your research. So people say, if you have to solve a problem and you are given 1 hour, spend about 50 minutes in understanding and analyzing the problem, and last 10 minutes for solving the problem. I recommend the same thing. Spend good amount of time in building the theory. The rest would become easier for you. But unfortunately, we have seen, whether in research papers or our research thesis, we as individuals tend to spend least amount of time on the most important aspect. Why? I have no idea, including me. Because of that, when we face any examiner or any individual who understands research methodology, I emphasize understand research methodology, we will not be able to stand his or her scrutiny. Software over a period of time has given us a lot of liberty, a lot of convenience in analyzing the data. But unfortunately, it has also made us lazy researchers in terms, if you get a data, use any research analytical tool, you get some results and we are happy about it. Just imagine if you aren't using appropriate methods for data collection and not a good research design and not able to select the right kind of a tool, then I don't know what those results mean. Therefore, if you are really looking for your research work to be accepted in a good journal, your methods have to be sound. Nobody is going to look at what kind of tool did you use. A reviewer would look at how strong are your methods, because that is the science. That is the one thing which assures that you can defend your work anywhere, or your work is acceptable. But if your methods are questionable, sorry, whatever analytical tool you might have used, it will not pass through a good reviewer. So let's look at which all methods are we talking about. I think yesterday we discussed a good number of them. Let's look at how to pass through these. First, sample design. Okay, it says population definition not clear. We don't write who the population is and why have you selected that population. As I said yesterday, the population is defined clearly by the scope of your work. and the title itself makes a lot of leads towards what kind of population you will be using. And then further, it is defined through the scope of your work. Then, no justification of selecting the elements of study. Elements, when you say elements, it's basically the individual from whom you're going to collect the data. Should be able to say, just give one simple example. One simple example. If you want to find in your city, what percentage of cars in the city are black color and white color? Who would you collect this information? And this question I've been asking at numerous workshops from the faculty, and Pat comes reply from the regional transport office. Some will say from the dealers. Yes, that is a source, but would you get the data from there? Would these two people entertain you? And do you think cars in the city are only from that part? You might have cars in your city coming from other towns, other states. So is that the right source? Is the right element of collecting information? So that is how you got to question yourself. Where am I going to get information from? Does he have information? Will he share information with me? Will he give me the right kind of information? If not, forget about it. You're going to find alternative ways of getting your information. Then the most important thing is no relationship established between the population and the sample. Most of the research work is always a sample study. It is rare that we do a census study. Rare, I say. So for a sample study to be done, it is most essential that your sample should represent population. A sample could represent population three ways. Number one, assuring that the elements we choose are from a defined sample, not outside this population. Number two, larger the sample size, greater the chances of representing the population. And the third one is, how are you sure that the sample which you are picking is definitely part of the sample? How are you sure that sample represents the population? I'll just give one small example. We did a small study on hotel industry, right? And we defined our elements. We took it as a quota sampling. That means in a hotel, we divided our population in terms of front office, back end office, rooms, kitchen, and so on and so forth. That was for hotel management graduates in the hotel industry. And we did a study using your, all statistical tools, including factor analysis, and sent it to a Scopus index journal. And we were thankful to the reviewers sending us a wonderful review. And one of the review came to us was that, how would you justify that your sample represents the population? That sent us to thinking. That means whatever the sample size we have taken for each subcategory, does that proportion also exist in population? Say, for example, we took male, female, X number of male, X number of female. So the question was, why this proportion did you take in your sample? Is it representing in the population also? So that sent us searching the text of publications of the past. And we happened to lay our hand to one of the publications, or FHRI, which actually gave close to what we had a sample, and we gave that as a reference. So what I'm suggesting here is, when you choose your sample, which is trying to represent a population, always give a reference. And when you say my sample size is XYZ, you could always say why this. So if you take a non-probability sampling, refer some of the publication which justifies sample size. A sample size cannot come from the vacuum. It has to be based on logic. No proof of how population elements relate to the variables of the study. That means whatever variables you are studying, are they related to the population? That means, is that kind of information available with the population? If not, or will the population share that information? If not, then your entire study design is faulty. No justification for the sampling method. Why did you use quota sampling? Why did you use stratified sampling? Why did you use area sampling or random sampling, etc., etc.? Yeah, this reminds me. Good number of people today misunderstand random sampling. When you ask them, how did you use random sampling in this context? That means they are trying to get data from shoppers in a mall, and they say, hey, I use random sampling. And when questioned how random sampling could happen, you probably didn't have the list of shoppers. They said, yes, whoever we met, is random sampling? No, that is meeting at random. There's a difference between at random and random sampling. So the English meaning of random is different than the technical meaning of random sampling. So a lot of friends in research actually confused about this methods of random sampling. Then no discussion of how sample size was arrived at. Yesterday we discussed elaborately how to justify your sample size. And finally, saying how sampling error was managed. Sampling error was managed. You'll have two types of sampling error. One is called systematic error, and another occurring because of the sample size. Or that is representation of the sample. Right. So the first one, that is systematic error. Systematic error happens when you start collecting data. This could result because of some of your respondents don't give a response to you. Some of them give a response without thinking. That is, give you extreme response on either side, either at 1-1 or at 5-5. Or some of them actually get influenced by you. That means try and give a favorable answer in your presence. Now, this systematic error would increase if the sample size is higher. So how to manage? That is actually, the enumerators. That means people who collect data, how to be trained, how to avoid this systematic sampling error. Another is sampling error happening because of the size of the sample. That means if your sample is poor representation of the population, it will result into biasness. This error is happening because of the biasness. That means having more information from one section or one group. So if you have, for example, in your study, there is a study on faculty members, and you use quota sampling. Didn't know what exactly quota sampling is, and say a sample size of 500, you ended up for interviewing 350 our female faculty members and 150 male members. Now, if population is not in that ratio, then definitely there is a high biasness towards female faculty members. So there will be always a sampling error. So how to correct it? To correct it based upon what is the population itself is, and in the same proportion your sample should be there. Another way of correcting this is if you are using a non-probability sampling, you try and have a higher or a more size of the sample. The larger the sample size, greater the chances of overcoming sampling error, because that will result into higher probability of having a better representation of population in the sample. So always a larger sample size have a tendency to have a larger representation, and also at the same time a larger sample size would always result into a lower bias. Then comes your data collection design. Assuring the appropriateness and soundness of the instrument. If your instrument is not good, I'm sorry, suppose if you try to weigh yourself on a weighing machine, and you weigh in the morning, it gives you 75 kg. If you weigh in the evening, it gives you 80 kg. And when you weigh after another 3 hours, it gives you 70. How good is that instrument? Definitely we will not like to use such an instrument. So you got to assure that our instrument is sound and appropriate. There are three important qualities of any instrument or data collection instrument. Or for that matter, if you have any other instrument used, I mean, it has to be a standard instrument. It has to have a calibrated well and proved by a lab. Only then will you use it. So if you are having a survey instrument, these three important qualities it should meet. One, it should be a valid instrument. Two, it should have a high reliable, or it should be a reliable instrument. Three, practicality. Practicality means it is easy to use. So you're going to look at here, justify the choice of data collection method. Are you going to have interrogative method or an observation? Why? Give an answer. Are you using existing instrument or a new instrument? If you are using a new instrument, definitely you're going to check its reliability and validity. And yesterday we talked a lot on this aspect. Which test did you use and what were the values? Is it acceptable? That means in case of reliability, which reliability test, or in case of reliability, which used, and what value did you get? Now, if those values were acceptable, are they acceptable? If yes, how do you say that? What is the reference? You say, okay, hey, my reliability on internal consistency using Cronbridge alpha was 0.75, hence I consider the instrument to be reliable. But who said 0.75 is acceptable? That is where you're going to give a reference. Refer so-and-so, so-and-so. That's it. That's done. Which methods and why for collecting the data with references? आपने जो भी मेथड यूज करें वो कैसे सही है, क्यों सही है वो, you give me the references. Number of questions, that's another important thing. Good number of reviews comes about it. Give a complete summary of your questionnaires, right? That is total how many questionnaires did you send to your respondents. What was your sample size? You say my sample size was 800. How many questionnaires did you send and how did you send them to? So the entire procedure of data collection has to be written in a very legible way. And then final summary has to be given. My sample size was 800 and I sent 1,000 questionnaires on the addresses, or I gave to the enumerators, whatever way you collected your data. Out of that, these many were received incorrect responses, these many were not received, and these many were received with correct responses. That summary is supposed to be there. And finally, which scale and why did you use for capturing the responses? There are different types of scales. That scales will depend upon the kind of an object which you are evaluating, or the kind of responses you are seeking, and what is that you are measuring. That will decide the scale. So mention that particular scale, justifying it. Then comes your avoiding analysis rejections. A poor analysis of data could lead to rejection due to the following. What one? Unable to determine the fitness of data for specific tools of analysis. I discussed yesterday. Once you collected the data, please see your data have certain characteristics met if you are using parametric tests. For example, you go to check its normality. Got to check its skewness. If these data don't fit to this, then you got to relook at what kind of statistical tool should I use. Subjecting data to only descriptive analysis. That means after having collected data, your analysis is only about averages, standard deviations, percentages. That is what used to happen in my time. Most of our time in our research, we used on descriptive analysis. Not many people understood statistical tests at that time, and we had no such you call it softwares. And then if you do limited analysis, only one or two aspects have been analyzed. That's a poor analysis. Unable to establish the assumptions of various tests used, you will appreciate the fact that every parametric test, whether is regression, ANOVA, t-test, etc., all of them have a number of assumptions to be met before that test can be used. So find out what our assumptions are for parametric tests and test your data for all those assumptions. And if those assumptions are not met, forget about using those tests. Use alternative non-parametric tests. But you never get disheartened when your assumptions of a given test are not met, because there are always alternative tools. Poor interpretation of the results. Probably you have not understood our analytical tool, that is a statistical tool, properly in terms of what does it actually mean. If a particular value of a particular test comes, what is actually meaning of that value? That interpretation should be correct. And then finally is unable to relates to the existing theory, literature, as I discussed yesterday. That is, result discussion is incomplete or result discussion is not done, your paper would be rejected. Okay, final one. Writing a good research paper for publication in an indexed journal. Why it is necessary? Because why to write it is because you will know how quality researcher you are. That means your scholar index will not be known unless otherwise your paper is published in an index journal. Like you have a quality of journals, there are quality of researchers. Researchers also have a scholar index, whether it's I-10 index or H index, whichever ways or number of citations. Basically, based on number of citations, you calculate these indexes. That's only possible if you publish them in index journals. You and your institute gains reputation and scores for accreditation if you publish it in index journals. Publishing good number of journals with good citations is a quality work indication. It's a good sign of quality work. It will always help you to establish peer network with other researchers across the globe if your H index is high, if your citations are very high. Will enhance your citations, your scholar index, and ultimately your professional image gets enhanced. How to write it? I think we discussed this quite elaborately, how to write it for index journals. So there is no point repeating it. Today, and also we crossed 5 o'clock. I would like to thank you for listening me patiently. If there are some questions, I could probably answer. If you're,
yes, sir. If sir you want to complete it, please complete the topic. So
no, I completed. This is a repetition of whatever we've been discussing.
This is last slide, sir, or 1, 2 or more slides?
Yeah. No, it's the last slide.
Okay, so we can take the 2, 3, 4 questions, sir.
Yes.
Okay, sir.
Yeah.
So, sir, after your presentation, I received the questions from our faculty as well as student side, and they're asking that, sir, the abstract should be a summary of a research paper or conclusion or findings or recommendations, or all the combination.
No, abstract. Yes, see, abstract should always be written. Yes. Yeah, I'm right. I'm saying abstract should always be written after the research work has been done. It's not a summary. It highlights 4 important aspects, as I mentioned earlier. The size of the abstract will depend upon the instructions given by the journal, right?
Yes, sir.
So these 4 important things which is required to be put in your abstract is, what is the research about? That means what kind of variables you are investigating and the relationship which you are investigating. So you could always say this research is about this. Then you got to say, what are the methods which you have used to investigate the stated relationship? That's number 2. Then comes the important results. What did you actually get after investigating? And the 4th aspect, I said, what are the implications of this work? Implications for, it could be for an organization, it could be for researchers, it could be for an academicians, it could be for the society, or any other class or group of people. That is the implications. So these 4 important things are highlighted. It is neither a summary nor a prologue. It is an abstract. It should not be misunderstood as a summary. Okay, the next one.
And another question is yes. Can we go for the another question, sir?
Yeah, next. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, next question is the what is the keyword and what is the use of the keyword to write under the abstract and why need to write the keyword?
Keywords are generally written for the purpose of finding your relevant work. Suppose you want to search. It's basically for the purpose of searching in database. That's it. That is the only purpose of keywords. You have to find related work for your own purpose. So normally you will find, there are large number of journals which don't give you a public access to the, people. So you'll always have either an abstract or the keywords readily available. So you know that this particular work is to be paid. So this is basically a searching key. No other
Okay,
relevance.
sir. Yes, sir. And sir, another question is the what is the standard size of the literature review in a research paper? Because
No,
in
there is
some
no.
research paper it's very long, in some research paper it's very short, in some research paper in the middle size like that. So what is the
Understood.
standard size?
Understood. You see, there are no standards as far as a literature review size is concerned. What is important here is guidelines of a given journal. Follow those guidelines. It says minimum, say 100 papers to be reviewed or 50 papers to be reviewed. Follow that. Otherwise, the general rule is most of the current work should be highlighted, which is important. Avoid, the work which is regional in nature or which is insignificant, which has not been published in high-end journals. So you must avoid that. Try to bring only that literature review into your work, which is published in good journals, which is current and important. That could be 50, 60, and sufficient enough to give you a sound theoretical building framework. Your sound theoretical framework is built. That's good enough. It could be 50. In even 100 research papers might not build a sound theoretical framework because the nature of your literature review is poor. So always follow the guidelines of the journal.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
And next one is okay. And sir, next question from the participant side that how we can save to ourselves from a fake research journal because a lot of the fake research journal in the market they're demanding the money. Sometimes they claim that the high index, UGC listed, Scoopers index, Q1, Q2, Q2, Q3, and like that they claim. And sometimes we
So,
send the research paper. So
understood.
what is
Understood. Understood.
yes,
See,
sir.
if in today's world where public access to everything is available, if we are duped by such people, then it is our own mistake. Every index, I said, what is important today is indexation of journals. I mentioned those indexation, important indexation services. See, people have to understand the difference between the publisher and indexation services. Okay. Thomson, Reuters, SCI, etc. They are all publishers. They're not indexation services. Right? They publish journals. Indexation services don't publish journals. They actually allow all the publishers to put their journals in that platform. Right? So you always have an access to them. Any journal which is asking for money is going to be a temporary on that portal because any good indexation services would over a period of time find out about such mean work of this kind of journals and they will remove it. So you will find yourself in a removal category. So before you start searching a journal, please go to the website and the listing of journals. And once you pick up a journal from your own field, Then go to the specific journal and look at its guidelines. If it is asking for money, it means this kind of journal is not going to stay for long. Whether it is UGC listed journal or other indexation services.
Okay, sir. And the next question is, sir, suppose a research journal is the international journal or national journal, but not in UGC listed, Scopus Index and Web of Sciences, or not in
Yeah.
HA Index and other kind of the index. So there is no importance of the such kind of the research journal?
No, definitely for a university as well as for you, because see, reasons are you are not going to gain any citation from them since they are not indexed, number one. Number two, it is not going to be counted. Your publication work is not counted by the institution in which you are working. However, if you are a starter, that means you are writing first time, or you are the one who is attempting to write. There's nothing wrong in starting with these kind of journals, because it may help you to gain confidence. That's it. That is the only significance of this kind of journals. But as a researcher, you have to progress, or over a period of time. So you have to stop writing after a year or so in these journals, having published one or two journal papers. Fair enough. Then you grade yourself up, move to the next level. That is what I'll suggest.
And sir, one more question, that what is the Q1, Q2, Q3 research journal, and what is the pre-Scopus research journal? If a research journal in the Scopus before some time and after that is not in Scopus and come in the pre-Scopus, if publish the research paper on such kind of the pre-Scopus research journal, then it will be matter in part of the counting and in matter of the quality research journal, or it will be counting like that?
See, Q1, Q2, Q3, there are certain indexation services which put their journals in certain categories. Q means quartile, top quartile, and below that, and the first quartile, second quartile, and all. And that is on the basis of number of citations a particular journal attracts. Okay. So it is considered that if a journal is in a Q3, that is the highest, it is of a high quality journal, considered to be. Okay. So you will always find that there is going to be a great competition for such journals. So every one of us would like to get our publications in a Q3, right? Or in other way, if you look at, in case of management, we have ABDC list, Australian Deans Committee. So they also have a categorized ABC. So A is the top level journal where you have best of the people trying to write in that. So there is a tough competition. So rather than writing for a category, and if you are a new one, you start from the lowest. There's nothing wrong in it, and then start upgrading, because you gain an experience. It's like writing research paper is like teaching. When you go to a classroom first day, imagine what is your condition. Your legs might start trembling, your voice doesn't come out clearly, your hands might shake, and you go to look at your notes time and again. And if you have spent about a decade or so in educating people, you are a completely changed man. You don't require any access to the notes, and you are so confident. Same is with research. When you are an early guy, you are shaky, don't understand much about research. You like to choose least important journals. You start gaining confidence, you start getting feedback from various sources. It's basically a gradual building process. Nothing happens overnight. So I'll advise my young researchers, start. Don't wait for the best paper and best journal. No, start from the least. Doesn't matter. As you gain confidence, as you gain experience, you will find yourself in a much better position over a period of time, rather than someone who even doesn't start. One of the biggest reason for failure is not lack of quality or lack of characteristics. It is basically lack of start. You start.
Very
Once
true, sir. Very true.
you will definitely reach your destination. I
Yes,
in
sir.
have a very simple philosophy. Set your destination. Doesn't matter if you don't know the way to it. Right? Put your headlights on, come on the steering wheel, press the gas, and start moving. As you keep moving, the paths to your destination would become clearer and clearer. And you go on traveling, you reach to your destination. That's the simple philosophy of life. Don't make life complex. Make it simple.
And thank you, sir. With your permission, your kind permission, sir, we have 2, 3 more questions, and after that we wind up and sum up the
Yeah,
things.
please quickly,
So,
quickly.
yeah. And what is the method of the select sample size for a research, or it's depend on a number of the survey question also?
As I mentioned yesterday, also there are two broad, types of sampling. One is called, probability sampling. Another is called non-probability sampling. So you must be very clear when one can be used. Say a probability sampling can only be used when you have a source list or a sampling frame, which means the population which you have defined for your work, it is completely listed. Say, for example, you want to do a research in your own town of the faculty members. If you want to use a probability sampling, make sure that all faculty members, say maybe say in higher education, they have a list available. If it is not available, can you build one? Now, if you want to build one, you can, but if it takes about a year plus and a lot of efforts and expenses, probably you will not like to do that work. So you will revert to non-probability sampling. Okay. Now, under non-probability sampling, there are different methods. Based upon your objective of the research plus the characteristics of the population, you will decide which method. Just give one example. So you don't have a list, you chose to be non-probability method, but you found that your population, the teachers have a lot of variety among themselves. So they are likely to give different answers to the questions. Say these teachers are different in terms of gender. These people are different in terms of their age. They are different in terms of their experience. They are different in terms of skills. So therefore, they are likely to give different answers to the given questions. Hence, it is essential to have a quota system. Right? Now, to have a quota system, you categorize them. And in each category, you decide the sample size depending upon what is the proportion of such people in the entire population. Maintain the same proportion in your sample also. And the sample size, when it comes to sample size, I think yesterday I mentioned, very clearly, if you are using a probability sampling, then there are formulas available. If you are not using a probability sampling, then, there are 2-3 ways which you can, justify whatever sample size using. Okay, that is one. The type of sampling data analysis tool you are using. If you are using a factor analysis, by the way, it says a size of 500 is required. If you are building a sum model using structural equation modeling, any of those methods in SEM, a size of 800 above is desirable. Right. So sample size according to the type of tool which you are using, number one. Number two, there are certain authors, if you Google, you'll find, they say in case of a non-probability sampling, the size of the sample will be determined by number of elements, so number of statements which you have in your question multiplied by anything from 5 to 10. So as I said yesterday, if you have 50 statements in your questionnaire, then multiplied by 5, 250 to 500 number is good enough. That is number 2. Number 3 is if you use central limit theorem. Means what? Central limit theorem says that if you pick up a sample from a large population, that is normally distributed population. So you have to understand the concept of normally distributed population, right? Then that sample picked up, irrespective of its size, would also follow a normally distribution. Understood? CLT. Or it also say law of large numbers. Larger the sample size, larger the chances of this being normally distributed.
And sir, one very interesting question from the research scholar side that they're asking that, sir, you quote in your lecture, in your speech, that in your master talk, that avoid the such kind of the research journal, those asking for the some kind of the
Money.
fees and money.
Yeah.
And some kind of the charges. But
Yeah.
a lot of the research journal UGC listed and the Scoopus index, they charge the money after 5 to 7 years. They debarred or maybe delisted from the UGC listed or maybe Scoopus index.
Yeah.
Publish this in such kind of a research journal. After that, the researchers get the degree of the PhD. Then the impact will come on that, on their future career after that.
No, it is there's no impact. Let me tell you. See, I said avoid such journals where payment is demanded for publishing your work. Okay. See, only thing, suppose if you have such a journal where you by mistake or intentionally publish your work, you got your PhD. No, there's nothing going to be wrong in it because at that time it was in listed category. However, in future, suppose you want to become guide yourself. So there are minimum requirements to become a guide in terms of publication. If you are a professor, you need to have at least 5 publications in such listed journals. Okay, and as an assistant, at least 2. At that point of time, if these numbers are not met, you may not qualify as a guide. That's it. Nothing beyond it. Okay. Because for the purpose of universities, accreditation and ranking, we use data only for past 5 years for accreditation and past 3 years in NRF ranking. So, an institution doesn't use much of old publications. It's only that it will reflect on your chances of becoming a guide in case you are not able to make sufficient publications. That's it, nothing beyond it.
And sir, the question is that if we write a research paper, so we can use the multiple research methodology or focus only on one research methodology or depend on research?
No, I
we use the.
I didn't find this. I didn't understand this. Multiple research methodologies means like you have to have one selection. You go to have one sample size. You go to have only one sampling method. You go to have only one data collection instrument. Or what is the question? I think probably he or she is asking about multiple statistical tools being used. Is that the
maybe
question?
Like quantitative, maybe go for the quantitative and qualitative, both research methodology in a research paper like that. The question
No, it is not possible. See, like if you are using qualitative, probably it is not possible to use quantitative methods because the data collectors, the design is qualitative, no? So if the design qualitative, how would you have quantitative data with you? But only thing probably the researcher wanted to ask is, can they use multiple analytical tools, statistical tools? Yes, you could and you should. I have mentioned in my talk that you should have a far greater scope and depth of your data analysis. That means using multiple tools. not just stick to one particular tool. If you are using, for example, a t-test, probably you like to use ANOVA. Or if the data suggests, probably you like to use regression. So it will depend upon what is the objective of your research. Objective of research would let you know what kind of research tools. You always refer back to your objectives. Okay. See, if you will not keep your objectives in mind, probably you always get confused. Which tools to use and why to use. As I mentioned yesterday, the type of tool to be used will first depend upon what is the objective, what is the research question which you want to answer. That was my first thing, most important.
Okay, sir. Thank you, sir. And the last question is the book chapters and the non-UGC listed, non-Scopus, non-Web of Science research paper. All these are the count in the API score, sir? The question from some researcher on the maybe some teacher side.
Book chapters, yes. Book chapters are counted for the purpose of even NAC also, because NAC have a certain weightage for conference papers in your conference proceedings, chapters which you have in certain books, but at least those books have ISBN number. They should have ISBN number. Proceedings should have ISBN number. Otherwise, it will not be recognized.
Thank you. And what about the sir non-Scopus and the non-UGC listed journal, like international journal, like that research paper count in API score?
It's not any journal. International is just a name. Unless they are listed, unless they are put in a certain indexation, it is of no use. I told you, if you are a beginner, you can start with.
No. The question is that it is count in the API score. The question in this context.
It will not be counted, as I said. It will not be counted. Why should I, as a university, count a work which is of no use to me?
Okay.
If I can't use it for my NAC accreditation or NRF, why should I? And even it is not used to make you eligible for a research guide.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you, dear. Thank you. It's a pleasure.
Sir, can you stop your full view can be done?
Yes, I
yes,
will.
Sir. And thank you very much, sir. You enlightened to us on today's webinar topics, how to publish the research paper in a quality research journal. And you also told about the Scopus, Web of Science, various other kind of the research and then the structure of the good research paper. You told about the appropriate title, abstract, introduction, literature review, method analysis, and the result interpretation, result discussion, conclusion, limitation, and the implications of the study and the future research direction and the various other things. You told how to select the appropriate journal, and you told the various criteria for the same and how to enhance the acceptability and avoid the rejection of the manuscript. You told about the desk rejection. You told about the rejection due to the poor theory building, avoiding the method rejection and the sample error like probability and non-probability, and the data collection, avoiding analysis rejection. You also told write a good research paper for the publication in index journal. So you also told us so many things related from the today's webinar topic. So we thank you very much to you, sir. Thank you very much. Yesterday and today you enlightened to us in part of the research, and you covered the widely area, so many things for a beginner, and those are the doing the research and continuously doing the research. So we thank you very much to you, sir. Thank you very much on behalf of the Parul University, on behalf of the Parul University family, on behalf of the Parul University management, on behalf of the Parul University president, sir, Parul University vice chancellor, sir, and registrar, sir. We thank you very much, sir, and we want to see you again and again on PU webinar platform. And thank you very much to enlighten to us, and you also give the wonderful answers and the very good answers to of the participants the questions, and you enlighten to us. So thank you very much for your master talk and wonderful talk, sir. Thank you very much, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye, sir. Bye. Thank you very much, sir. Thank you.